Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, this is John from Heroes and Legends, and welcome to part 3 of our 6-part Rivals of Ixalan full set review, where today we're going to look at all of the cards in black that you'll find in this upcoming set. Now, if you've been watching the series, you know already, this is first and foremost a limited set review. We're going to talk about the utility of these cards in Draft and Sealed first. But we will mention other formats as well when it's applicable, like maybe Standard, Modern, Commander, or what have you. So with that being said, quickly before we get into it, just a real fast reminder, if you check out the description below, you'll find a few ways to support our channel, one of which is our Patreon page. You're also going to find links to products on Amazon. Any purchases you make once you go via those links will get a small percentage. And then finally, you also have Flipside Gaming. If you use the promo code, save yourself some cash and support us at the same time. It's a win-win, so always appreciate anyone who looks at that stuff. Thank you very much. With that being said, let's get into it. We got a lot of cards to talk about. We're going to start off with Arterial Flow. For limited purposes, this can be a fine card. It just depends on your build. So, for example, if I'm in a more methodical, controlling build, I'm using a lot of removal, counter magic, and such, this can be a fine card to slow down the game a little bit. Now, your opponent chooses what they discard. This is a mind rot effect with a little bit of upside to it, but you know what? That can still be very good for you at the right time if you time it right, especially early on in the game. They have to make some tough choices. Later on in the game, they can't hold on to maybe the removal spell they want to hold on to or something like that. So this can have implications. If I'm a little more aggressive, though, I might skip this because I don't want to necessarily take pressure off my opponent if I'm in an aggro deck, right? So it depends on your build, but it's very, very playable. I like the fact that a lot of the cards now are designed for each opponent in mind, so it's kind of nice for things like Two-Headed Giant as well as, of course, Commander. And beyond that, there's even this little clause where you gain a little bit of life and make your opponent lose a little life, so that's kind of good because there are times where gaining life especially is going to matter with some of the vampire cards. So just an extra little incentive maybe to play it based on what you get in your pool. Having said all of that, I don't really see this crossing over into Standard necessarily. I don't think it's fast enough and efficient enough for what you're trying to do in that format right now, but it's very good for you, at least in the right build, for Draft and Sealed. Canal Monitor. Okay, this is a curve-filling 5-drop. Not really exciting. I mean, a 5/3 is very fragile for 5. If you need a 5-drop, you just don't have anything else in your pool, maybe more so for Sealed than Draft, hopefully, unless your Draft went really bad. Then maybe I play it, but for the most part, I think I'm going to be able to find something better at 5, because it's not like you need a ton of 5-drops in a deck, right? 5, 6, 7 drops, you want to be pretty conservative anyway. You're only using your best ones, so this is probably not your best one. If it is, you might be in trouble. Champion of Dusk. Okay, now this is a good vampire. This thing, a 5 casting, costs 4/4 Vampire Knight, so it gets any benefits you get from Vampire Matters cards. But also beyond that, I mean, enters the battlefield, draw X cards, and lose X life, where X is the number of vampires you control. Yes, on one hand, you do have to be a little bit careful with that. You don't want to just kind of burn yourself out with a card like this. But drawing cards is one of the most powerful things you can do in Magic. So if you have a handful of vampires out, drawing a handful of cards could be quite good for you. Now, even if you don't, let's say you just play this into an empty board. You're getting a 4/4 for 5 that replaces itself. You get to draw 1 card because it does count itself. Okay, you know what? That's actually pretty awesome. So this is a rare. You won't see it all the time, but I do think it's first pickable. Even better, obviously, in a vampire strategy because you can draw more cards, and hopefully a vampire strategy will let you gain a little life too to offset some of that damage a little bit. But even if it doesn't, there's a lot of times you're still going to be fine with it, and you won't have any problem taking the damage because even when you're behind, there's no better way to catch up than actually drawing a bunch of cards, quite honestly. So there are times where you get this too late in the game and maybe you're just too close to 0 life, but you know, most of the time this is going to do some work for you, I think. I think this could see Standard play. The big question for me with a card like this is, what's the vampire deck actually going to look like? Is it going to be more white than black, or is it going to be an even split, or what have you? If the deck turns out to be better in the meta being mostly white, then maybe this doesn't quite make it. But if they go a little deeper into Orzhov, then I think this is very playable in Standard, actually. Dark Inquiry. These Thoughtseize type effects that cost 3, even if they don't have any drawbacks, aren't necessarily the best all the time. They're not unplayable, though. So for limited purposes, again, similar to the card we saw a few moments ago, if I'm trying to be a little slower, methodical, pick apart my opponent's hand while I defend myself and gum up the ground, this is an okay card. You'll play this. Or if there's a card that your opponent has that you just don't have a good answer for, maybe you just go ahead and cut your losses and sideboard this in and hopefully hit it. That's possible too. But a lot of times you won't be bothered with this. You'll have other things going on at the 3 spot. You'll want to put pressure on your opponents. The 3 spot is a pretty critical spot in Draft and Sealed to start putting, beefier creatures on the battlefield. You don't necessarily always want to skip that unless you have a good plan or a good kind of side plan to protect yourself. So again, doesn't always make your cut, but it's fine. It's definitely not unplayable in the right build, and it can be good for you at times, definitely. Standard, yeah, I don't really see it getting there for 3 mana. I don't think it's streamlined enough for the current format. Dead Man's Chest. All right, this card's weird. When I first saw this, maybe because it was previewed by Mark Rosewater on his Twitter, the first thing my mind thought of was, is this like an uncard they didn't use in the last set? Like, where is this coming from? It's crazy. It only costs 2, so I'll give it that. At least it's cheap. Enchant creature an opponent controls. When it dies, exile cards equal to its power from the top of its owner's library. But then you can cast a non-land card from among them as long as they remain exiled, and you can spend mana as those mana of any color. So there's a lot of potential upside here. Like, I put this on my opponent's creature. If it dies, then I get to look at a bunch of cards from the top of the library. Also works kind of like a slight mill effect. And then I can just play those cards basically whenever I want for the mana I have. And awesome. It's kind of like card draw too. So it sounds great on paper for 2 mana. The problem being with this card is just simply the fact that it's a little hard to pull off. I have to put it on one of my opponent's creatures, so they have to have a target first off. Then it has to die. Can't get exiled, it can't get bounced, and there's a lot of bounce. If they're in blue, you might as well just say goodbye to this card, because their creature's probably getting bounced. So it can't get exiled, can't get bounced, it has to die. The thing finally dies, and then, depending on its power, I mean, maybe it was a big creature, maybe it wasn't, but whatever it is, I get to see a bunch of cards. I'll probably maybe hit something, but the question is, how relevant is that something going to be? If it's a bunch of lands, well, I just whiffed. If it's not a bunch of lands, then is it something I care about? Or is it like their 2/2 creature that is not going to do me any good on turn 8, right? Like, so it's so high variance. It's fun. Like, I think it's super awesome because there's going to be great moments, right? This card will totally pay off sometimes. And when it does, you're going to be like, that's awesome. And your opponent's going to be looking at you, passing the salt shaker. And it's going to be crazy. But it's going to make for an awesome story, but if I'm being competitive and spiky, do I actually play this in my sealed or draft deck? I don't think I can. I want to, and totally I'm going to at some point. I got to try this card out. But I think if I'm really concerned about winning, I'm probably just going to play something else for 2, quite honestly. But it's really cool. I'm glad they made a card like this. It's actually really awesome design. Dinosaur Hunter. This is actually a fine 2-drop, like a 2/2 for 2 with upside. Sign me up. I'm not even going to read anymore. I could play this card just at face value right there. But if I read further, yes, it's a pirate. That could be good for me some of the time. And it has like this dinosaur death touch. Basically, if it damages a dinosaur, they die. So it's better against dinosaurs. So very, very playable card. Like, I would run this a lot of times just because I want 2-drops. Remember, 2-drops are the most important part of your draft and sealed deck. 2-drops and your big bombs, your like game-winning cards, but those 2-drops keep you alive to get to those big cards, so they're a huge part of the deck. So you're going to play vanilla 2-drops that are 2/2 some of the time, and you're going to be happy with them. This one gives you even more upside. Why not? For some reason, if you choose not to play this one and your opponent's got some dinosaurs, well, of course, side it in. This card, I don't think it will see standard play, but if the dinosaur deck becomes like really good, then hey, it's a sideboard option. Dire Fleet Poisoner. Okay, another really strong card here. Another great 2/2 for 2. This one with even more upside than the last one, believe it or not. So this is phenomenal just out of the gate. But look at what this thing can do. 2/2 Flash Pirate. Has Death Touch. Enters the battlefield, target attacking pirate you control gets +1/+1 in Death Touch. There is so much versatility here for just 2 mana. Your opponent's going to have to think about every combat situation if they know you have this and you have a black and 1 untapped. Now, the thing is, it's a rare, so you won't see it a lot. And let's be honest, draft and sealed, you can't play around every rare or every mythic, right? Like, your opponent can't just sit there and try to play around this until they see it. But that first time, you could get them with it. And then after that, you could simply bluff this, right? Like, just hold back that mana and bluff it, and it's just as good as having it in your hand a lot of the time. This is an amazing card. I mean, you get attacked in, flash into play, Death Touch, take out their best thing, awesome. If you're attacking and being more offensive, they set up their blockers, flash this in. As long as you have a pirate anyway, then target that pirate, and you did some good work there. And that's kind of awesome. So this card is good enough to see standard play. I mean, first pickable in draft, obviously. If you couldn't tell, I was very excited about it. And I do think to see standard play, who knows, maybe in a few different types of builds potentially, but especially if there's any sort of builds with pirates or enough pirates for that second ability to matter, it's going to be really good. Dusk Charger. Here's one of the Ascend cards. The thing with Ascend is, I think in limited games, you're probably getting there at some point. Like, it's going to happen. It's just a matter of when it happens, and is the card good enough when it does happen? That's kind of how I've been assessing these. So this one is actually a fine card. Like, a 3/3 for 4 is just on par for where you kind of want to be for a curve filler. And then later in the game, if you hit Ascend, it just becomes probably on par for where you want to be for that point of the game, because now it's a 5/5. Doesn't have evasion, but, you know, 5/5 body, it's for 4 mana. That's good enough. But you just have to get to the Ascend. Black's a good color for Ascend, though, because you do have some treasure creation opportunities, and that does help you get there potentially faster. So that's kind of cool. But again, yeah, it's a very playable card. Maybe it doesn't always make your cut, but yeah, I think this is just fine. Dusk Legion Zealot. This for me goes beyond just fine. This is actually a really good card, too. Black's got some killer new cards, especially even some of the commons and uncommons. But this is a 1/1 for 2. It's a vampire. When it enters the battlefield, you draw a card, you lose life. Okay, so I love these type of cards. Maybe one of the more famous versions of this type of card is Phyrexian Rager. It's a 2/2. It costs a black and 2, and it does the same thing. Of course, it's not a vampire. But the 2/2 is awesome. I would even pay 1 more if this was a 2/2 and actually be really happy with it. 1/1 does feel a little fragile, but you know what? In the vampire deck, I'm not super concerned about that, because I got a card that's going to ping me for 1, and maybe I gain some life, so maybe it's a wash. And it pings me for 1, and it replaces itself, and it's a body on the battlefield. I mean, maybe I just chum block with it or something, but so many times when it comes to vampires, you're concerned about going as wide as you can, as fast as you can, and then buffing your stuff. I mean, either through some combat tricks or anthem effects or lord effects. So this, a lot of the times, isn't even really a 1/1, depending on what's going on with your deck. So take all that into account, and the card's just giving you another draw. Yeah, sign me up. This is pretty sweet, actually. Very excited about this. Now, with that being said, where do you see this being played? Well, for limited purposes, yes, play it. I know it's not a 2/2 for 2, but I can forgive it with that ability. And it's going to be good for you. I mean, maybe it's not always the first pick out of a pack, but it's a very high pick, I think, honestly, if you're going down this road. Better with vampires, but still, it is a body that replaces itself. Now, aside from that, what about standard? I think it could see some standard play. Again, my big question about the vampire deck is how much Orzhov does it want? I mean, the original version was mono white. Recently, we have seen more black in those type of decks, and now this set is definitely giving you incentive to do possibly even more. If that's the case, then yeah, I think to see standard play. If it turns out the deck's better being mostly white, then maybe that's not the case. But I do think it's got some potential there. Fathom Fleet Border. Another actually pretty good card here. A 3/3 for 3. It's another common too. This is an Orc Pirate, which is actually kind of sweet on its own. And on top of that, enters the battlefield, you lose 2 life if you don't control another pirate. Okay, let's pretend I don't control another pirate. 3/3 for 3 and I take 2. All right. Cool, you got me. I guess I take 2 and I get a 3/3 body on the board early on. I'm good with that. I'll deal with that. If I get another pirate, wonderful, then I don't even have to worry about the drawback. So this is a great aggro card. You're going to find that I think the pirate's strength actually is like more Rakdos aggro than anything. This set in particular doesn't make me feel like I want to do something crazy like build out a whole bunch of treasure tokens or anything like that, although that can be good with Ascend. But it feels like the stronger plays are the aggressive Rakdos pirate plays. And you're going to see that as we go through the next couple colors. And this is a card that lends itself well to that strategy. Could that strategy make it into standard? The only problem I have with that is we're going to see a card in a few moments that really hoses aggro. So that could be a problem when it comes to standard. But if it could get past that, yeah, I mean, there are some pieces here that make me want to think Pirate, Rakdos, aggro. I don't know. I'd at least want to try it out. Maybe put together a brew. It seems kind of interesting. But aside from all that, yeah, this is a very good card. Maybe, again, not your 100% first pick, considering it's a common. You might be able to get some of these a little later on. But it's a good card for you, better with pirates. Forerunner of the Coalition. Here's another card that kind of supports that idea of aggro pirates, because It lets you search up a pirate. So tutor effects always good. This one goes on top of your library, but tutor effects are great. Like, what if you have an awesome pirate like Becca Brass or something, right? Like, you might be, I'll just play this and try to hit the legendary creature in my deck, you know? So that itself could be good. But even if you don't have something like that going on, like just playing a bunch of pirates and having an opponent lose a life is kind of interesting if you're going all in on aggro. If you're not, I would skip this. Unless, again, I have that amazing pirate like Becca Brass or something. But if I am not in that situation and I'm not going aggro, I probably could play better things, quite honestly. Now, if you don't have any pirates, definitely skip it. You don't want to play a 2/2 for 3. So skip it there for sure. But yeah, you know what? Aggro, a lot of times you get a lot of early damage in, but then you kind of stall out and your opponent gets their defenses up and you're kind of stuck. You run out of gas. This does keep the damage flowing later into the game. So I do like it for that purpose. Something to think about. And maybe, again, if that deck could get there in Standard, maybe this would be a piece of it. Golden Demise. This one's kind of interesting. These -2/-2 effects that are universal, a lot of times I'll side those in once I see the matchup. Now, granted, they could be good against vampires, they could be good against merfolk, and they potentially could be good against pirates in this particular set. So maybe in this set, I would at least entertain the thought of main decking it some of the time, depending on what I'm playing. They're not great against dinosaurs, but on the flip side, they're also not as harmful if you're playing dinosaurs. Problem being, this is 2 black and it's really off colors for dinosaurs. You can't even really splash it that effectively, right? So that's a little awkward. So you do have to take into account how much that could hurt you versus how much it could hurt your opponent. Now, I haven't even gotten to the Ascend part yet. If you can hit Ascend, now it's not going to hurt you anymore. It's just going to affect your opponent. So if that's the case and you feel like that's something that interests you, then okay, put it in your deck, and eventually, like I said earlier, at some point you're going to hit Ascend. The question is, does it matter anymore? Or has the game gotten out of control at that point and you're not doing enough? It probably depends on the matchup again. If you're up against a vampire deck and they don't have a lot of like lords or something like that, or maybe like an Anthem effect, then this becomes pretty good, especially if it's one-sided, right? But if they have dinosaurs, or if they happen to have a couple of the vampire lords on the battlefield or something, this becomes really bad. So I would probably sideboard this in most of the time and limited. As for Standard, I think it's a little too situational, and I'm not going to say you're not going to hit Ascend in Standard, because I do think you will a lot of the time. But I don't think Standard wants to play the game of maybe I hit Ascend, maybe I don't. I think they're looking for cards that are going to be more universally solid and not take a lot of risks. So because of that, I don't think it really gets there. Grasping Scoundrel. Okay, this is a 1-drop 1/1 that attacks in as a 2/1. So it is kind of an aggressive pirate, similar to a lot of the other things we've already seen and will continue to see. So again, if you're into aggro, if that's your thing, this is very, very runnable. If I'm not all in on the aggro, again, if I'm trying to do something a little slower, mid-rangey, more controlling, then I probably skip this card for another utility piece of the actual deck I'm trying to build. But very playable card for you and limited. Does this cross over well in the Standard aggro, if there is Standard aggro? I don't know about this one. I do think you would prefer to probably have something that's lower casting cost that has haste or first strike or something like that, as opposed to something like this, unfortunately. So I don't think it gets there, but yeah, playable and limited, sure. Gruesome Fates. Alright, this is another card that is going to allow you to do damage later in the game once your gas kind of runs out from your aggro deck. It's a sorcery this time around, but for only 3, your opponent's going to lose 1 life for each creature you control. So again, you played all these aggro creatures, you got that early damage across, and then things just kind of stall out. This is another way to push across those last few points of damage. I don't really see this in Standard, even in an aggro deck, just because it's a little too conditional. Like, you don't want to draw this early in Standard and get a dead draw and take the pressure off your opponent in aggro. That could be devastating to you. But in limited, you can take more of a risk like this. I think you can get away with using something like this later in the game to try to make up for potential moments where you can't get other damage across. Impale. Alright, this is a great limited removal spell. So let's pick it apart first. It's not an instant. It's 2 on color. It's 4. But it destroys target creature, and that's just good enough. Is it good enough to go into Standard? Now, there's better ones right now, right? There's cards that are more versatile, that are instants, whatever. But that doesn't matter. This is all about getting the board clear for your stuff in Draft and Sealed. This is first pickable in Draft, actually, depending on the particular pack. But very first pickable. I wouldn't be sad to grab this right off the bat, honestly. Really, really fantastic removal. Mastermind's Acquisition. This is a weird one for me, because basically, this card is a forecasting cost tutor, but it also lets you tutor into your sideboard. So it does open up the possibilities of cards you could grab, especially for game 1. That's interesting, right? But is that good enough to get past the forecasting cost? See, the problem with tutors that are 4 or 5 casting costs, at least for the most part, with some exceptions that have other weird abilities built in, they kind of make you take the turn off. So you don't really see them cross over well into standard typically because of that reason. You're taking the turn off to get what you want, but then the problem is next turn the board state could even change and what you want could have changed by the time you actually play it. And it just doesn't feel fast enough. It's a little too slow. Unfortunately, I don't know if this gets there when it comes to Constructed. I would definitely play this though in Limited because first off, it smooths out your deck. You can be a little slower and draft your Sealed and get away with it. So I can play this, go get my big bomb that's going to help me win the game, or that removal spell I need, or whatever it is, and I have the extra opportunity to go into my sideboard, which is bigger than it is in, say, Standard Constructed or something like that, because instead of 15 cards, it's all my other cards that I'm not playing. So it does give me a lot of options to go to the sideboard too. I find that kind of interesting, actually. Now, I do want to point out, in case anyone doesn't know the rule, when they do say choose a card from outside the game and you're playing a competitive format, then it is your sideboard. If you play Commander, the actual rule is that the players have to decide before the game what that means. So that's actually the rule. So the players will say, okay, you can use cards that are like in the room because we don't need you searching for cards for an hour. Or you can use something from a sideboard you create or something like that. Whatever you decide to do, you just have to play with that, those rules, make those rules up ahead of time. Mausoleum Harpy. All right, this is actually fine flyer for limited purposes. Like 5 feels a tad expensive at times for a 3/3, but with flying, I'm okay with it. And it has the Ascend ability, which gives it a little more bonus, perhaps. Even if it didn't, though, sometimes you just need a flyer in the air, and this does have a little bit of beef behind it being a 3/3. So you know what? A lot of times this makes my cut, even for 5. Maybe not all the time, but a lot of the time. If I feel like I can hit the Ascend, wonderful. Whenever another creature I control dies, it gets +1/+1 in the form of a counter, so that's kind of nice. Unfortunately, it's just my creatures, and I kind of feel like that's a little boring. I feel like that could have been everyone's creatures for 5, but I don't know. Maybe that would have been too good, but yeah, I do think this is just fine to play in Limited. Won't really do anything in Standard, though. Moment of Craving. Okay, this card is amazing. I alluded to this earlier when I was talking about some of the obstacles aggro could have. We'll talk about that in a second. Let's talk about Limited first, though. First pickable. This is a common that's first pickable in draft a lot of the time. This does amazing work for you. 2 casting cost, instant speed, target creature gets -2/-2, and you gain 2 life, which sometimes is relevant when you're talking vampires. So much going on here for 2 mana. It protects you against a lot of threats. Awesome card at common. These will be floating around a draft. Pick them up when you can do it. You'll be real happy that you did. Standard? Well, I mentioned this earlier, but this is one of the reasons why I think aggro is going to have a hard time getting off the ground. Even if this is coming out of sideboards, aggro decks are going to have a huge obstacle to deal with. This is perfect against them. It takes out like that small beater they're trying to beat you down with early, and it gains you 2 life, so you get some of the life back that they took off your life total early on, and it helps you recover from those first few turns. That is backbreaking for an aggro deck. I think decks like the Pirate deck I was kind of playing around with, talking about maybe there'll be some sort of Rakdos deck that has Pirates and is aggro. I don't really think that can happen because of this card. And even beyond that, decks like Ram and Apparat and even Vehicles are going to be hurt by this card. So the Vehicles deck actually is probably dead in the water at this point, because not only is there this, but we're going to look at some more artifact destruction they're adding to the set over the next few colors. So yeah, I feel like they're saying goodbye to anything vehicle related thanks to this set. But aside from that, though, this card, incredible. And yes, it does see standard play. Maybe it's out of sideboards, but it definitely gets there. This might even see some modern play potentially. Oathsworn Vampire. Yeah, this is actually an interesting one because it's very persistent unless your opponent can exile it. It comes into play tapped. It's a 2/2 for 2, so I can forgive that, though, because if I gain life, it can come back from the graveyard. I can cast it from the graveyard. So there are a lot of cards that have these little incidental life gain clauses attached to them. Cards like this are why. The downside, though, is you still have to pay the 2 mana to get it from your graveyard back to the battlefield, even if you do gain the life. So you have to have the mana to do it, and it comes into play tapped, so it's a little slow. Other than that, though, sometimes cards like this that are persistent can be just fine for you and limited, as long as you have enough life gain opportunities. If you don't, I might skip this for another 2-drop that's a little more consistent, doesn't come into play tapped. But if this is my choice of 2-drops, it's not bad by any means, and it can be better in some builds. I don't really see this doing anything in standard, but it's an interesting card, definitely for limited in the right build. Pitiless Plunderer. Okay, here's one of the ways to get treasures. Whenever another creature you control dies, you get one. So this could help you towards your ascend, it could help you color fix, could help you ramp. There's a lot of things this can do. A little expensive if you're thinking ramp, though, honestly, or even color fixing by turn 4, turn 5. But you get a 1/4 body out of it, too, which is good if you're trying to slow down the game a little bit, gum it up. If you're not main decking this for some reason, you bring it in against the aggro decks. Again, you might take some early damage, but you can start to cut that off, hopefully by turn 4 with a card like this. So, yeah, it's interesting, and it's not something that you're going to see in standard necessarily, but again, there's a lot of reasons you might want to play this in a limited build. It's not always going to make your cut by any means, but there are some decks that will feel like this card is worth it. Ravenous Chupacabra. This card is phenomenal too. Another fantastic card in black. 2 black, kind of hard to splash, but okay. 2 black and 2, 2/2. Enters battlefield, destroy target creature and opponent controls. Sign me up. I mean, this is a little bit like Necrotal. It's actually better than Necrotal in a lot of ways, actually. So, yeah. I would play this. First pickable, great uncommon. This will see standard play, maybe in a few different builds even. It's just that good. I mean, it's so swingy. You get a 2/2 body on the battlefield, and you take out their best thing for 4 mana. Yeah, that's actually kind of awesome. One thing I do want to point out, too, there's so much fantastic removal in this set, and not just for creatures. There's a lot of artifact, enchantment removal and stuff we'll be looking at, that these feel like stopgaps to try to combat Ascend a little bit. So yes, I said it before, especially in Limited, you're going to get to Ascend, it's going to happen, but there are some tools out there that could slow you down, so keep that in mind. Rivera Ambush, another really good removal spell. This is for smaller creatures, exile target creature power 3 or less, but it's an exile effect, it's 3, it's instant. Again, sign me up, this is phenomenal. Another card that I might first pick, honestly, in a draft pack. And it's going to deal with a lot of problems. Not all problems, but it's going to deal with the problems it deals with very effectively. Like that vampire we just saw, for example. It's not coming back if I exile it. So it's a really awesome card. And there's a lot of really strong creatures with lower power toughness that are in this set. So keep that in mind too. And yes, this could see standard play. Maybe out of sideboards, but I think this could see standard play. Recover is a reprint, actually. It's been a while since we saw this card, but it was in Modern Masters 2017, just wasn't standard legal. But if you played with it there in Sealed or Draft, you know it's actually pretty decent. It is a return a creature card from graveyard to hand, but it replaces itself. So for 3 mana, yeah, I'm on board, even at sorcery speed. Maybe a 1-of in some decks. I do like having cards like this in my limited decks because it does allow me to be a little more free with blocking and trading and stuff, knowing that I have a chance of getting the creature back later. So it does allow me to be a little more aggressive sometimes. I do like that. So yeah, very playable card for Draft or Sealed. Sadistic Skymarcher. Okay, this is maybe one of my favorites of these cards that are like, show away creature from this particular tribe and pay less. And you know what? This is great because even if I don't show a vampire, it's a 2/2 flying lifelink for 3. I'm already playing this card. Like, you didn't have to like sweet talk me with the whole show a vampire and it costs 2. That's great, but I'd still play it. Yeah, you already had me. So it's good. It's good for limited. It turns on some of these life gain abilities on different cards, which is nice. And it's also a creature that could lead to some nice swings. I mean, you play the center in 3. If your opponent doesn't have a blocker in the air, it's a 4-point life swing, even with just 1 attack in. Yeah, that's good enough, folks. Good enough for me. And I do think, again, if that vampire deck goes deep enough into Orzhov, then yeah, I could see some standard play potentially, because playing this for 2 is amazing, right? Like, that's tremendous. But even if I can't do that in my Draft or Sealed decks, I'm still going to play this and be pretty happy with it. Tetsumak, Primal Death. Okay, here's the Elder Dinosaur for this color, and it's another good one. I mean, these are all pretty good, right? 6 casting cost, 6/6 as Death Touch, and you might say, well, it's a little big. I mean, does Death Touch matter? Most of the time, probably not, but every once in a while, like if your opponent has 2 4/4s and you know they're going to double block anyway, then it does kind of 2-for-1 them, you know? So there's reasons that it's good, but it's okay. It's nothing amazing. But that ability is awesome because it's repeatable. It's not something you can only do once. If you have the black mana, you can do it. So you get to reveal this, pay a black mana, you put the prey counter on target creature, and so you can only do that during your turn, but once you do play this and enters the battlefield, you get to destroy those creatures with the prey counter on it. So you could do this one of two ways. You could like have a setup turn where you just pay a bunch of black mana and just kind of hit all their stuff with these counters. And then next turn you play this and just wipe their board. Or if you don't want to forecast yourself that much, depending on what kind of deck you're up against, then maybe you just pay 7, take out their best thing. That's really good too. And you get a 6/6 with Death Touch. I don't know honestly about standard just because the casting cost is a little bit high. The Death Touch might not be as relevant. And the fact that there's amazing board sweeps that already exist, I don't know if I need to use this like as a board sweep. So I don't know if I see it there, unfortunately. But I do think I would first pick this in draft. Great for draft or sealed. And Commander, again, all these legendary Elder Dinosaurs seem really fun for Commander. Even though this one is kind of off color, which is kind of interesting for other dinosaurs. But it's still just a good card. Maybe you want to even try this out as your Commander. Tomb Robber. This is a weird one. Okay, this is a repeatable Explorer effect, which is sweet. But they're asking a lot. Thing costs 3, it's a 1/1. It has menace, but pay 1, discard a card to explore. So you're paying a lot for these explorers. Now, if you explore into a land, you don't need the land, then you can use that as the discard, and maybe it kind of feeds itself a little bit. But really, how much time and energy are you putting into this 1/1 menace to try to make it, what, a 2/2, 3/3, maybe 4/4 menace? And at that point, like, okay, a 4/4 menace is going to be blocked by 2/2/2s anyway. So what's the point of this card? Honestly, the point of this card, I don't think has anything to do with exploring or the size of this creature or anything like that. I think the point of this is to pitch a creature into the graveyard that you may want to take back later. There is a real light reanimation theme. We're going to see this as we go throughout the week and we get more into some of the green and black cards, the multicolored cards. A really light reanimation theme. And if you happen to be lucky, because this is a rare, you're not going to see this a lot. If you happen to be lucky and get some of these cards together, you might have something interesting on your hands. But that's not going to happen all that often. And if that's not happening, I'm probably not playing this card in my limited builds, quite honestly. If I have some cards that combo with this, okay, maybe I'll think about it at that point. Same thing when it comes to standard. I don't think there's enough pieces for like that reanimation strategy to get there at this point. But I do think this might be foreshadowing for something that's coming down the road. Maybe in Dominaria, black or black-white will have some sort of reanimation theme going on or something. I feel like this is just kind of sprinkling the seeds for some of that. There's also a little bit of graveyard hate, which we're going to see later in the week too, which again makes me feel like, they're setting us up for something here bigger than what we've seen in this set. So stay tuned. I think there's more to come from cards like this. For right now, it just feels a tad bit awkward. Twilight Prophet. This is awesome. Great mythic. It does depend a little bit on Ascend, but again, like I said, we're limited. I think you get there at some point. Before you get there, though, it's still a 2/4 flyer for 4, and it's a vampire. Yeah, it's awesome. Once you get Ascend, though, this card is bonkers. If this can stay alive, right? Like on your upkeep, you get an extra card. You kind of do the Bob thing. You get an extra card, but instead of you taking damage based on the converted mana cost, you gain the life, and your opponents, all your opponents. So in multiplayer, each one takes the damage. What? Right? That's awesome. So yes, I know it does require some setup. It's not like doing that out of the gate or anything like that. But for 4 mana, and it's hard to splash, 2 on black, I know, but 4 mana for a 2/4 flyer, and when you hit Ascend, you just basically are going to win the game, unless you're just really far behind for some reason. So yeah, your opponent's got to deal with this. They got to take this out. If they can't take it out, you just kind of win, and it's awesome. So this does see standard play, maybe in more than one type of deck, who knows. I would like to see this, of course, in the vampire deck, but maybe there's other decks that even can get away with running this. Now, again, Ascend and Standard is a little more situational. It's not going to be easy to pull off, or I should say as easy to pull off as it probably will be just in Draft and Seal just by playing Magic. But there are ways to manipulate it. If you have a little bit of treasure creation, a little bit of token creation, and vampires, of course, will probably have some token creation, then I think there's ways to get there. I think there's ways to get there consistently enough. And like I said, this is still a 2/4 flyer, even if you miss. So, yeah. Twilight Prophet. It's in the background too. The art's amazing, by the way. Awesome card. Vampire Revenant. Okay, this is a curve filler. Like, it's a fine flyer. Like, forecasting cost 3/1. It's a vampire 2. I'll play this a lot of the time, as long as I have room for it in my deck. I like flyers, so I will go out of my way to play a 3/1 flyer for 4, even though it size-wise doesn't feel like the best deal, but just being in the air, it's a pretty good card for limited. Vona's Hunger. Okay, on the surface, before Ascend, this thing is an instant 3 casting cost edict. I'd actually play that and be pretty happy with it most of the time in Draft or Seal. Maybe it's not like a top pick for me, but Edict effects can be good. I like them. They sometimes backfire, obviously, if your opponent has like a token or something, or they're just going to get rid of the smaller creature. But if you can play it at the right time, maybe early on, you hit a really good creature or something with hexproof, it's going to feel real good. So there's high risk, high reward sometimes with the edicts, but they can be good for you, especially at instant speed. Now, with that being said, this has more to it than that. If you can hit the City's Blessing, now it is not just an edict effect, but it's actually your opponent's getting rid of half their stuff. And it's important to note, too, this is another card that is each opponent, so for multiplayer purposes, keep that in mind. Now, if they're getting rid of half their stuff, does that mean you win the game? No, not necessarily. If you're behind, it doesn't save you. It might slow down the life loss, and maybe you're at the point where it's like, okay, I get an extra turn because of that, but it doesn't necessarily say, hey, you win the game now, right? Your opponent's going to get rid of the things that matter the least because it is their choice. That's just the nature of these cards. And even though it seems like a nice effect, it might not be as big as you need it or want it to be sometimes. Other times, it will slam the door on a game. So, yes, very playable in draft or sealed. I don't really see this crossing over into standard because of the inconsistencies here, but yeah, it's a fine card for limited. I could see myself playing it probably most of the time if I got it. Voracious Vampire. It's actually a good one. Even though it's a 2/2 for 3, I'm giving it a pass because the abilities are great. It has Menace, and then when this enters the battlefield, another Vampire will get +1/+1 to Menace till end of turn. So might get some extra damage across with that. 2/2 Menace, even for 3, feels pretty good. Feels on par for me, and it's a Vampire. So very good curve filler. I'm happy to run this in limited. Alright, with that being said, those are all the cards from Black in Rivals of Ixalan. Very, very good color. Maybe the best color? I don't know. We got a few more to look at, but crazy removal. Crazy removal in this particular color. They did a really good job just with these cards. The power level feels a little push. More push in this set generally, actually, than maybe Ixalan or some of the other recent sets. So this is going to be interesting to see once these cards start to hit the actual battlefield and see what they do. But looking forward to it. Tomorrow we're going to be back with all the red cards. So until then, hey, thanks for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe. Have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.